In 2005, relief pitcher Bob Wickman of the Cleveland Indians had one of the best seasons of his career. In 64 games and 62 innings pitched, he achieved an ERA of 2.47, adjusted ERA of 171, a WHIP of 1.258, struck out 6.0 batters per 9 innings, and earned 1.9 WAR. As the closer, he also saved 45 games. For his efforts, Wickman was selected to the All-Star Game and even received MVP votes. The most notable part of his season were those 45 saves. They were tied for the most in the American League and the second most in all of Major League Baseball. I don't think I need to explain just how great of a season this was. You don't record an ERA that low while leading your league in saves by accident. Actually, maybe you do. On the surface, this looks like a fantastic campaign by Wickman. So, what exactly am I getting at? Well, while Wickman earned a solid 1.9 WAR, that was his baseball reference WAR. Do you know what his Fangraphs WAR is? Take a guess right now what you think it is. Bob Wickman's 2005 Fangraphs WAR is negative 0.3. Yes, you heard that right. Wickman recorded terrific numbers and was one of the best relief pitchers in baseball, and yet he recorded a negative WAR per Fangraphs. How exactly is that possible? It has to do with his FIP. I've discussed FIP in previous videos, but for a short summary, FIP stands for Fielding Independent Pitching. It calculates what a pitcher's ERA quote-unquote ought to be based on events he has control over, aka strikeouts, walks, and home runs. Think about it like this. If a pitcher has an elite defense behind him, they'll record more outs on balls in play. However, a pitcher with a terrible defense won't record as many outs. For instance, the difference between a great fielding shortstop and a poor fielding shortstop could be the difference between a ground out and a base hit. What exactly was Bob Wickman's FIP in 2005? To go along with a 2.47 ERA, Wickman had an FIP of 4.65, more than 2 full runs higher. That is a wild disparity. Typically, FIP doesn't differ too much from ERA. Seeing anything more than a full run happens only occasionally, maybe a handful of times a season. Over 2 runs though? That's pretty rare. Also, just to clarify one thing, Baseball Reference WAR takes into account a player's actual production, like ERA. Fangraphs determines WAR based on a player's advanced stats, like FIP. That's why there's a big disparity in WAR. Bob Wickman might have recorded a solid earned run average of 2.47, but since he should have had a mark of 4.65, Fangraphs determined he actually was not great. It's not often we see a pitcher have a disparity that large, and it's more or less an anomaly. To see just how much of an anomaly Bob Wickman's 2005 season was, let's compare it to other seasons all time. First and foremost, just how good was Wickman when compared to other pitchers that year? There were exactly 127 relief pitchers in 2005 to throw at least 50 innings. Yes, Wickman threw over 60, but I like using 50 as the baseline. His 2.47 ERA and 171 adjusted ERA both rank as the 24th best overall or inside the top 19%. Additionally, his 1.9 WAR is the 34th highest of all relievers, and as mentioned earlier, his 45 saves were the second most. A top 25 placement in ERA and adjusted ERA certainly implies he was a top 25 relief pitcher in baseball. However, what about his Fangraphs WAR? Despite having the 34th highest baseball reference WAR among relievers, Wickman's negative 0.3 Fangraphs WAR is the 427th highest. Of course, that takes into account all relief pitchers, regardless of innings pitched. If we look at that group of 127 with at least 50 innings, Wickman's WAR is now the 117th highest, or in the bottom 10%. Also, his 4.65 FIP would rank as the 102nd highest in this group, which is in the bottom 20%. For comparison, using a rough approximation, a 4.65 ERA that year would have equaled around a 90 adjusted ERA. That would have been the 104th highest adjusted ERA. Bob Wickman was simultaneously one of the best relievers in baseball, but somehow also one of the worst. We'll get back to that in a moment, but first, has anyone else ever matched Wickman's feat? Let's start with his FIP. Of all pitchers throughout the history of Major League Baseball, with an FIP of at least 4.65 and a minimum 50 innings pitched, Bob Wickman's 2.47 ERA is the 5th lowest of all time. Here are the marks of the other 4 pitchers, and I might add, only 2 of them were also relievers. If we were to look at the best adjusted ERA with an FIP that high, Wickman's 171 mark is the 4th best and 3rd best among solely relievers. Just for fun, I also looked at his Fangraphs WAR again. Through the 2024 season, there have been exactly 74 instances of a pitcher saving at least 45 games in a season. Wickman's negative 0.3 WAR is the lowest, being the only negative mark. Anyway, while a handful of others had a more jarring season, what stands out for Wickman is that he also had 45 saves. Those few pitchers in front of him, with a higher disparity in ERA to FIP, combined for 1 save. How did a pitcher overperform that much, but still have that many saves? At first, I thought his stats may have been skewed by a handful of bad appearances, but that's hardly the case. In his first game of the season on April 6th, Wickman was called in to pitch the 9th inning to protect a 3-0 lead against the Chicago White Sox. It took 6 pitches to lose that lead. After a leadoff single, Paul Konerko hit a 2-run home run to cut the deficit to 1. In the next at-bat, Jermaine Dye hit a homer to left field to go back-to-back with Konerko to tie the game at 3. 4 batters later, Juan Uribe hit a sacrifice fly to drive in Aaron Rowand for a White Sox walk-off victory. 4 earned runs charged to Wickman and only a third of an inning pitched. That game would be the worst of the season for him, as he wouldn't allow more than 2 runs in a single game for the rest of the year. However, following that first appearance, Wickman had a sparkling 1.90 ERA, while his FIP was 4.19. That 2.29 difference is even larger than his actual one. In fact, a 1.90 ERA would have been the 6th best in that group of relief pitchers mentioned earlier, while a 4.19 FIP would have been the 76th highest. That by itself still raises the obvious question. If Wickman's ERA and FIP difference isn't due to a handful of games that skewed it, why is it still a huge difference? Was he simply just not a great pitcher, but somehow got lucky time and time again? Honestly, yeah, that's pretty much it. I looked at Wickman's splits and saw something unusual. In games where he earned a save, he had a 0.61 ERA. In save situations, a 2.42 ERA, and in non-save situations, a 2.63 ERA. Those are all expected. He was lights out when he earned a save, and his 5 blown saves on the year skewed his ERA for all save situations. All of those numbers make total sense. However, Wickman had a whip of 1.366 in save situations and a mark of 1.105 in his 45 saves. Those might not seem notable, but in this case, they absolutely are. To put it simply, Bob Wickman was the king of pitching into and out of trouble. When there were 0 outs in an inning, batters had a 282 average off him. With 1 out, that dropped to a 247 average, and with 2 outs, a 203 average. As you can see, over a 200-point difference in OPS as well. Furthermore, when the bases were empty, batters had a 306 batting average against him. When there were runners on, a 149 average with a near 400-point difference in OPS. With runners in scoring position, an 094 average with a sub 400 OPS. When the bases were empty, batters were legitimately hitting at an all-star level against him. With any runners on base, especially runners in scoring position, Bob Wickman suddenly turned into Bob Gibson. This was extremely interesting to me. Somebody that would just constantly put runners on base, but somehow work out of it legitimately each and every time. If you think that's crazy, listen to this. I looked at every single pitcher in MLB history that had an ERA at or lower than 2.42 and a whip of 1.366 in save situations, then sorted by number of saves they had. Bob Wickman in 2005 naturally has the most, 8 more saves than second place. Do you want to know which pitcher is second? That's again, the second most saves in a single year from a pitcher with a whip that high and an ERA that low in save situations. That second place player is Bob Wickman of the 1999 Milwaukee Brewers. Yes, you heard that correctly. Wickman didn't just do it once, he did it twice. Here's the top 5 leaderboard, where there's only a single pitcher that's within 20 of the record. I am in no way surprised that Mitch Williams is the only one within 20, but that's beside the point. The large number of base runners is the reason behind the high FIP, which is the reason behind the low Fangraphs WAR. To wrap up, I'd like to pose this question. Was this even a good season? In my opinion, short answer, yes, it was a good year, with an incredible amount of luck. I will, of course, let you decide in the end. In 2005, Bob Wickman had, on the surface, a fantastic year. 45 saves, a 2.47 ERA, and 171 adjusted ERA. However, his high FIP is reflected from the fact that he would constantly allow base runners only to pitch around them and secure the save nevertheless. 20 years later, it's still one of the most unusual seasons a relief pitcher has ever had.